Hello to everybody listening. Thank you so much for joining me in this week of FODMAP presentations hosted by Free From Plus Allergy. Now, my name is Dr. Kim Faulkner-Hogg and I'm an advanced accredited practicing dietitian. I gained my PhD in 2004 in the area of celiac disease, gluten-free eating and food chemical intolerances. So for 25 years, I've been working with the team of doctors and dietitians at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital Allergy Unit, investigating the possible role of food chemical triggers in both gastrointestinal and non-gastrointestinal symptoms. I also have a private practice in Malabar in Sydney. Now today, I've been asked to discuss possible food options to explore if low FODMAPs is not enough. So what do I mean by that? I see clients who have tried the low FODMAP diet and could detect no changes to their symptoms. However, many people who do try the low FODMAP diet do get some relief from their symptoms, but sometimes it's just not as much as they were hoping for. So they tell me that they're eating foods that they feel are triggers and they're wondering what else they may be able to do to investigate their triggers with foods. Firstly, you need to be aware that symptoms can have multiple triggers and not all symptoms are experienced because of food. So I'm going to start with a sort of a common scenario of how many of my clients start their health journey. Some recognise the impact of stress and hormonal changes on how they're feeling. Exercise can help some people, and yet it can trigger symptoms in others. Many don't consider environmental factors such as hairspray, deodorant, petrol, cigarette smells as having an impact on their symptoms, but they can. And most often when people are feeling bloated, uncomfortable, tired and sluggish, they'll start themselves investigating some diet changes. They make the easy diet changes first, and that's what I've sort of listed here as stage 1. And by this, I mean that they tidy up their eating and endeavour to decrease the processed foods, the high sugar, high fat, fried food component in their diet. They may decrease alcohol and caffeine and soft drink intake, try to eat more home-cooked meals and increase the fruits and the vegetables. For some, this is all that they need to do. They're feeling great and they can move on. But if it isn't helping their issues, many jump to what I've sort of listed here as the stage 2 avoidance measures. Now, quite commonly these days, people will look at wheat and gluten or dairy and lactose foods and say reduce them either a little bit or totally. Now, you need to be aware, especially with the wheat and the gluten, if you do this, the test to rule out celiac disease can no longer be done. So once you do get to the doctor and the doctor wants to do these tests, you'll then need to put gluten back into the diet in order to be tested. By this stage, many people feel a bit too sick to load too much gluten back into the diet, and we can't perform that really critical test. So if you're contemplating making a major food change to your diet, this is the time to speak to your GP and have your symptoms assessed for possible medical conditions. If any of you listening have been self-managing your symptoms by diet alone, before proceeding further, you need to see your GP so they can rule out or rule in, whatever the case may be, medical conditions that can be treated. The doctors may be able to offer you total or partial relief of symptoms experienced. I'm going to list here just some medical reasons for some gastrointestinal symptoms. So this could be reflux, peptic ulcer, helicobacter, diverticulitis, gallstones, kidney stones, or there could be more complex inflammatory bowel diseases such as celiac disease, ulcerative colitis, or Crohn's disease. So if we're looking back at this spectrum, this could add in medical conditions and medications that could alleviate or sometimes even themselves contribute to symptoms. Now, once all the medical conditions have been ruled out and the symptoms remain, that's when diet investigations for possible food intolerances are generally recommended. Now, the internet is riddled with possible diet suggestions for you, but the 2 diet programs that are used mostly in the medical field are the low FODMAP diet investigation and the low chemical food investigation protocols. This week is all about FODMAPs. So you will already know that this acronym stands for fermentable, oligo, di, and monosaccharides and polyols. Now, these are poorly absorbed chains of sugar molecules which are not digested in the stomach or the small bowel. They make it into the large bowel where they're used as food by gut bacteria that live there. The bacteria then produce gas, which in turn nurtures the gut wall. Now, this is a good thing. But in some people, this can lead to experiences of bloating, stomach pain, wind, diarrhea, or constipation. Now, there's various types of fermentable sugars that can be found. Some are in the fruits and the vegetables. Typical ones are things like garlic and onion and apple. They're also found in wheat, some other grains, dairy, honey, nuts, and legumes. Then the manufacturers, they can add fructose or sorbitol, inulin, or mannitol into your foods, and as such, these need to be limited in the diet. So a low FODMAP diet addresses predominantly the bloating and the lower gastrointestinal symptoms. Now, research suggests that about 75% of people who trial this diet reduce their bowel symptoms. So if you're not getting the improvement that you're hoping for, the first thing you would check are your guidelines for FODMAP eating, and are you doing them well enough? Now, a mouthful or two off the plan is usually not going to be the reason for a whole host of ongoing symptoms. But you do need to look at, are you following the correct portion sizes that have been set out in the Monash app for low FODMAP eating? Perhaps the wheat fructans, which you might have been including, may need to be swapped out now for gluten-free foods. Did you eat out socially too many times and not follow the guidelines? Have you been on it long enough to see a difference? In my experience, bloating and discomfort is often reduced for most people on this low FODMAP plan. But clients tend to seek me out because of any of the other symptoms that they've got that may have remained and have been little altered by going and eating the low FODMAP foods. So many of my clients are dealing with more than just gut symptoms. So here's a range of the symptoms that I often see. If we start with the GIT, we can get the sore mouth, mouth ulcers, itchy mouth. You can get sort of that pain, reflux that you're feeling up here. There can be nausea, vomiting. Then you've got your bloating, the wind, the cramps, the pain, diarrhea, constipation, and these can alternate. If we're then looking at what might happen with the respiratory symptoms, you can get a blocked nose, a drippy nose. Some people experience a postnasal drip, sort of that feeling that they're swallowing mucus. Some will have the irritated throat, sort of always getting a bit fluey, and some will have asthma. If we're looking at the nervous system ones, again, this could be headaches, migraines, mood swings, poor sleep, restless legs, nightmares. People very much talk about that brain fog, that inability to concentrate, the fatigue and the lethargy that can come along with all of this. For some people, there can be anxiety, depression. There can also be the muscle and joint aches and pains. And then if we're moving into the skin reactions, there can be the hives, eczema, a variety of rashes and itches. Sometimes the itch is without a rash and sometimes it's with the rash. So this is a group of symptoms that we've been noted over time respond well for some people to the removal of certain food triggers. Now, these lower gut symptoms, which I've indicated here in the green box, they're usually the ones that are triggered by, say, FODMAP foods, these fermentable sugars. And this could also include lactose for some people. Now, some dairy foods, especially the harder cheeses, which don't contain the lactose, do contain some other food chemicals which could trigger symptoms. And we're going to look at this soon. And this is why dairy can be confusing for some people. Now, I've put wheat in 3 of our categories. So the gastrointestinal tract, the skin, and the nervous system effects, because it's been shown to produce these sorts of symptoms. There's 4 substances in wheat which are currently being investigated by research groups around the world to try to see how it does that. Look, there are medical conditions with wheat that can lead to respiratory tract issues, but because they're medical conditions as opposed to intolerances, I've not listed them there today. Now, when my clients present with this vast array of symptoms, I can see that they're dealing with more than just their gut symptoms. And so my mind will switch into the possibility of food chemical intolerances. Now, what we're going to discuss now is that some biologically occurring chemicals found in fresh, naturally grown foods and other chemicals used as food additives in the food industry have been implicated in provoking symptoms in all of these symptom groups listed here on the slide, including the bloating and the wind commonly thought of as the domain for FODMAPs. Now, this range of chemicals, it does not include those that the farmers will have as pesticides and in fertilizers. All right, that's a completely different group of chemicals, and I'm not addressing that here. Now, I chose this picture to talk for this talk today because grapes and limited amounts of wine and cheese can be consumed on a low FODMAP diet. If I see these foods in my client's diet history, they're clues to me that the high amounts of natural chemicals in these foods could be contributing to symptoms. Now, we never think, well, where did the flavour of a food come from? Well, it's a combination of the biological chemicals that grow within that food. There are thousands of naturally occurring chemicals, but there's only 3 that we've had that are a little bit more research than others, and they are the salicylates, the amines, and the glutamates. Now, these chemicals can irritate our nerve endings, cause the release of mast cell mediators, which can lead to many of the symptoms that we've discussed. Now, there's a whole field called nutritional dark matter, which is looking at chemicals that we've not even collated yet, and we have no idea what they may do. Now, tasty, aged, matured, and vintage hard cheeses, these have strong flavours. These cheeses are lactose-free, but it's in the flavour that we find the natural chemicals. These flavours become stronger with time due to an increase in the production of amines and glutamate chemicals as the cheese ages. These grapes here contain all 3 of the natural chemicals, the salicylates, the amines, and the glutamates at high amounts. And when the grape juice is then fermented to a wine, they become stronger. The wine may also have a preservative that's added to it when it's bottled. So in addition to these naturally occurring chemicals, there's a number of other added food chemicals which are used by manufacturers to colour, preserve, or enhance the flavour of commercially bought foods. Now let's take a look at these groups. First, we're going to start with the natural salicylate. Now, aspirin is a naturally occurring chemical in plants. We make a medicine from this. Aspirin is a salicylate. Salicylates form part of the plant's natural defense system. They're acids, they have this very tart flavour. So they're often found just under the skin of the plants because this acid will then stop bugs and other animals from eating this unripe fruit. The fruit will ripen when the seed inside is mature enough to grow into a plant. So when the food does ripen, the salicylate level will actually decrease and it becomes sweeter and more desirable to eat. Now, in the wild, when this fruit is eaten by animals, they will transport the seed, they will drop them elsewhere, and a new tree will grow. So salicylates will serve a purpose in nature. Salicylates found in nearly all fruits and vegetables, the herbs and spices you see here in the picture, tea, honey, peppermint, wines. It can be in medications, and it can be the basis of many smells. Now, amines, these impart those strong, rich flavours to a food, and there's different types of amines. There's 4 main ones that we will find in foods. So there can be an amine group in the fruits and vegetables, which is slightly different to the amine in the meats, again, slightly different to those we find in cheese and dairy products, and slightly different to the amine that is in chocolate. Some people are sensitive to the whole group, and some just more sensitive to one type of amine than another. Unlike salicylates, the amines and the glutamates are at their lowest when just picked or when meat is freshly killed. So amines and glutamate will increase with age, with slowly cooking food methods, and with the fermentation of foods. Sourdough breads Now, they may be more beneficial from a gluten and a fructan perspective, but that sour flavour that comes along with them from the fermentation, this is because amine has developed during that fermentation period, and hence the stronger flavour in those breads that you don't find in others. So they may not always be good for everybody. Now, glutamates occur naturally in many strongly flavoured foods, such as tomatoes, mushrooms, and Parmesan cheese. They impart that umami flavour that's generally associated with Asian cooking. Glutamates are rarely found alone in a food. In these pictures, the cheese and the soy sauce contain the amine and the glutamate, while the grapes, the seaweed, the mushrooms, the tomatoes contain all three of the natural chemicals listed there. These pictures here show you some of the foods eaten on a low FODMAP diet plan that contain high to very high quantities of these natural food chemicals. These are clues to me that we may need to look at natural food chemicals as a potential food trigger. But chemicals can also be added by manufacturers to increase shelf life, to enhance our eating experience. These can also be problematic. So we're actually going to take a step back in time now and look at a little bit of history here. And I want you to meet the Poison Squad. Now, these gentlemen, they're considered heroes for the role that they've played in history as they volunteered to actually consume untested food additives. So in 1902, at a time when beer was laced with strychnine, bread was filled with chalk, and borax was used as a preservative, these men were given extra money and free room and board in exchange for sitting down nightly in this full evening dress that you can see them pictured in at tables laid with white cloths and silver settings to voluntarily be fed foods that were laced with untested, potentially poisonous additives. Now, they determined that borax caused severe stomach aches, loss of appetite, and major headaches. The experiments with salicylic acid were stopped to let the group get over their symptoms. Reactions were also seen to formaldehyde, benzoates, sulfites, and caffeine. These experiments have led to the creation of what is now the American Drug Administration and the need to determine the dose and the safety of the ingredients and to declare all ingredients, including narcotics, on a label. So we owe a lot of thanks to the Poison Squad. If we move forward now to today, there's lots of additives in foods and you'll often only see them listed as a number. And these have been tested and they will have certain limits that they can be used of in foods. Now, the numbered chemicals that manufacturers do add today, we have been tested, and so we have presumed them to be safe at particular levels in the food. But we know that a small percentage of the population will react to some of those food additives. So here are the ones that are investigated in the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital Food Chemical Elimination Diet Protocol. When we eat food, the pleasure starts with the look and the smell of the food. So colours are added to improve the look of the food. Take a glance next time you're in the shop at some of the vanilla ice creams. Sometimes when you read that label, you'll see that a blue colour has been added, and this enhances that whiteness or brightness of the ice cream. Sometimes yellow is added, and this will make it look richer and creamier for those who are after that more decadent vanilla experience. So many of the natural colours are not on this list, but annatto, which is colour 160B, is, as it's been shown to produce symptoms in some people. Now, chemicals are also there to mimic a natural flavour. So an orange jelly snake will not only have the orange colour, but it will have a flavour that will mimic the salicylate and amine flavour that makes up orange. And that orange flavour will be more orange than orange. So this is echoed in all of the other different colours that you see here. They will have a matching flavour that's quite intense. Now, if there is not enough salt or sugar to preserve a food, other chemicals are added to prolong the shelf life. A variety are used depending on the makeup of the food. Sorbates and benzoates are generally used in moist foods like soft drinks, cordials, beers, dips, dressings, marinades, soft drinks, bottled foods. Sulfites can also be in dried fruit, in wines, sausage, salami, and packaged meats. Nitrates and nitrites are usually found in bacon, ham, and corned beef to help fix their colour and inhibit germs from growing within the meats. Sometimes you could find these in a cheese. Now, propionic acid preserves baked products. You'll find them in the wheat baked products and you'll find them in gluten-free baked products. In recent years, I'm noticing, though, a shift of sorbates being used to preserve gluten-free breads and gluten-free baked products more so than the propionates. Now, antioxidants preserve oils and fats. The oil in a deep fat fryer will often have an antioxidant added to decrease the rate at which the oil breaks down and therefore has to be replaced. In order for a shortbread biscuit, as an example, to sit on a shelf, shortbread biscuits have a lot of butter in them. Butter is a fat, so an antioxidant would need to be added into that biscuit to prevent that butter from going rancid. Now, monosodium glutamate is a flavour enhancer. So this is added to a food to improve flavour. So monosodium glutamate is known as MSG or food number 621. It's made from natural glutamates that are found in fresh foods, and then they're altered to very slightly to form the salt MSG. The other numbers that are listed here, 620 through to 625, are other slight variations of this theme. Because manufacturers know that people are on the lookout for 621, it's now not as commonly used as these other numbers. If you are in an MSG-free Chinese restaurant, legally, they only have to be 621 free. They can still use any of those other numbers that are listed, and they will have plenty of natural glutamates in their food by the use of the soy sauce, miso, and oyster sauces, just for some examples. So additive 627 here is a ribonucleotide, which can enhance the flavour of any naturally occurring glutamate in a food fourfold. So glutamates will enhance these savoury dishes. They can hide on food labels by being listed as natural flavour, yeast extract, hydrolyzed vegetable protein, textured vegetable protein, or protein isolate as examples. Here are some of the pictures of the low FODMAP food, which could contain colours, preservatives, or flavour enhancers that some people might react to. So this then makes up the list of both the natural and added food chemicals that might trigger symptoms in some people. Now, a particular symptom is not associated with a particular chemical. So what works for your neighbour is not necessarily going to work for you. Each chemical can trigger a number of symptoms. For instance, salicylate can trigger stomach pain, asthma, hives, and headaches. So some clients might only have one particular chemical that triggers their symptoms, and some may have more. In the study that I did in people with celiac disease who still had continuing symptoms, we found that on average, people reacted to about 5 different trigger symptoms. So within one, say, food-sensitive family, the different family members may have different symptoms. The symptoms may be triggered by different chemicals. So each person needs to do their own experimenting. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to this. And just like FODMAPs, this too is all about the dose. So it can be demonstrated, say, with chocolate, because a lot of people come to us and they say they're confused because some days they eat chocolate and get a headache and some days they eat chocolate and they don't. So there's not a direct association between the chocolate and the headache. So the reason is, the problem is not chocolate itself. The problem is the amine within the chocolate and the fact that this amine chemical can be found in dozens of other foods. In some foods, the amine is barely present, and in others, it's there in really high amounts. So whether or not you get a reaction will depend on which other amines are eaten, in what quantity they get eaten, and if you go over what the body can tolerate, that's when you're going to get your particular set of symptoms. Now, I'll just remind you of where we started this talk, and that is that many things can contribute to symptoms. It's not all food. So this graphic just gives you a bit of an idea of what may be contributing until, so to speak, your cup runneth over and you get symptoms. So perhaps you have a FODMAP trigger and you're aware of this, and so you are eating limited FODMAP foods. Perhaps this week has been more stressful than other weeks, and so stress may be contributing. You might need to be careful which salicylate foods you're eating, and so you've got some in the diet, but you've been reasonably controlled. Then you ate fish and chips from the corner shop. You realise that they put chicken salt on the chips when you thought, or you asked for it to just have regular salt on it. So now you've got this unexpected MSG load. You then notice the overwhelming perfume smell coming from the lady waiting in the line behind you. And before you know it, you've hit your personal tolerance level that's too much for you, and at some stage you'll get symptoms. Now, symptoms are not always immediate. They can be delayed, and this only adds to the confusion because it's natural to look back at the last thing you were exposed to and blame it. But it's often a combination of things that have led to you reaching your tolerance level and for symptoms to occur. The threshold for symptoms does vary between people, and your threshold can vary over time. So many of you may go through periods where you're more reactive and then periods where you're not so reactive. Because of this, it's always good to push those boundaries periodically and just see where you're at. If you think this is starting to describe you, I highly recommend that you find a dietitian who specialises in this area of food chemical intolerance to take you through the investigative procedure. Now, there's 4 stages to this. Stage 1 is reducing the total food chemical load and seeing which symptoms improve. Do not stop there. Too many people stop at this point and don't move through the testing where you can then start to expand your food again. That is the whole point, finding out what you're sensitive to and then expanding the food. So you must do stage 2, which is the challenges. And here you get asked to eat sort of an odd assortment of foods in reality, which contain just the chemical that you want to be testing, so that you then can discover for yourself what is a problem chemical for you. When we get to stage 3, this adds initially back chemicals you did not respond to. So we relate those chemicals to a food and that goes back into the diet. In stage 4, we now add back foods that contain chemicals you did react to, but we're adding it in small amounts and in a particular order so that we can try to find out how much you may be able to have in your diet. What is your tolerance level? And what you can tolerate totally depends on the level of symptom that you're actually happy to live with. It's important to understand that this procedure is not curing you of any underlying condition. It's purely trying to identify the chemicals that trigger your symptoms. It can help you make wiser food choices for yourself, and hopefully you'll have the symptoms less severely and less frequently going forward from the procedure. It's important to make your diet nutritionally adequate no matter what your diet choices are. So when you start one of these restrictions and you narrow down your food choices, when you start these elimination diet procedures, you will narrow down your food choices. Now, food intolerance isn't about staying at that level. It's wanting to add some back. So when you add some food back, you're going to add back the number of nutrients in your diet as well. But there still may be limited food choices for some nutrients, and supplements might be necessary. If I give just one example, I see far too frequently the number of people who never replace calcium in their diet when dairy has been removed. Now, nut milks, they just don't cut it for calcium, and not a lot of them have that calcium fortification put back in. So you may need help working out where it's coming from in order to make your diet nutritionally adequate. So it's important when you investigate food chemical intolerances to see a dietitian who specialises in this area. Not only can they explain the diet and the challenge program and guide you to suitable products and recipes, but they can ensure that you are covering your nutritional basis as you go. Now, to find a dietitian, put this URL from your screen into the computer and you will reach a page in Dietitians Australia, Find an APD. Now, that means an accredited practicing dietitian. If you know someone's name, then you can put it into these boxes and then their contact details will come up. If you don't know someone's name, then you need to search by state or postcode. So you can put those in that are close to you, and then you need to find someone who's knowledgeable in this area. To do that, the area of practice box needs to be completed. So if you click on this, you'll get a drop-down list of specialties. You'll need to find the specialty allergy and food sensitivity, which will be close to the top. And then when you submit this form, this will search for dietitians in your area with this specialty. So that concludes my overview on possible food chemical triggers that could be investigated if FODMAP restrictions were not giving you as much symptom relief as you were hoping for. I have some information on my website and I post tips periodically on Instagram, and you can see the contact details that I have here. Finally, I'd like to thank Free From Plus Allergy for giving me this opportunity to discuss this topic with you, and thank you for listening.